First of all, welcome to everybody. Welcome to Captain Doug Beattie. It's great to have you with us. Great privilege and honour, and something which is very pertinent to us all, because you all watch the news. You've all got families and friends, and somewhere you'll have, if you've got members of the family, you'll have friends who are in the armed services. And if they're not patrolling the seas or flying in the air, then they're on the land, particularly in our mind at the moment, Afghanistan. So to have Captain Doug Beattie with us is very important, because it brings to mind not something of the past, but something of the present, and something that affects us all. Tonight then, we hand over to Captain Doug Beattie and our singers, and we offer this night your ears, your hearts, and your pockets to those whom we celebrate this evening. No man's land under snow is like the face of the moon, chaotic, crater-ridden, uninhabitable, awful, the abode of madness.
In September 1917, we were sent to France to support the Royal Flying Corps. I joined number 12 Squadron, Royal Naval Air Service, at Battalion Snithe near Dunkirk. The first thing I did when I got to Calais was to have a nice plate of egg and chips. My job was to service aircraft and rescue aircraft parts from any machines that crashed behind the lines of the trenches. As mechanics, we had to keep the aircraft flying using anything we could. The pilots liked to take their machines up, liked us to take us with them in their machines, because the way they knew the mechanics would service their planes properly. I used to sit behind the pilot and drop out bombs. If the enemy appeared, I used to open fire with the Lewis gun. We used to keep more or less with the same pilot because we became a team. Some of the pilots, you'd hear them come back from flying over the lines and share some of the stories they used to spin. Once, when we were moving forward in the Ypres salient to support the offensive, we got to this particular place just as it got dark. It was a strange place, and we hadn't been cleared to go forward by the Canadian engineers. There was a lot of fighting in the area, and you couldn't walk about because it was too dangerous. It was safest to stay put, so I stuck where I was. I put my ground sheet and blanket down on a bit of concrete and went to sleep. You didn't have a pillow. You put your boots together and you'd sleep with your head on them. We all got lice on our clothes. We used to run the seam of the shirt over a candle flame to get rid of them. Of course, you'd wash your shirt if you could, and when you did wash it, you'd hang it out on a bit of line. Next thing you'd see was lice crawling along the line. I regretted the fact that we were never given first aid training, as on one occasion the pilot landed with a bullet in his thigh, bleeding badly. Although they got him out of the aircraft, he did not survive the journey to the casualty clearing station.
of the Desert by Georgina Howell, writing about her time working for the Red Cross Wounded and Missing Fire Department in France in the early part of the war. I very nearly cleared away the mountain of mistakes which I found when I came. Nothing was ever verified, and we went on piling error on error with no idea of the confusion that was being caused. If we are not scrupulously correct, we are no good at all. It is fearful the amount of office work there is. We are at it all day from 10 to 12:30 and from 2 to 5, filing, indexing and answering inquiries. The more we do, the more necessary it is to keep our information properly tabulated. I need not say I'm ready to take it all. The more work they give me, the better. I like it. There is a recent order direct from Kitchener that no visitor is going to hospital without a pass. It's unspeakably silly. The reason given out is that spies get into the hospitals, question the wounded and gain valuable information concerning the position of their regiments. Anyone who has talked to the men in hospital knows how ridiculous that is. They are generally quite vague as to where they were or what they were doing. I can work here all day long. It makes a little plank across the gulf of wretchedness over which I have walked this long, long time. Sometimes even that comes to near breaking point. I ought not to write of it. Forgive me. There are days when it is still almost more than I can bear. This is one, and I cry out to you.
Shallow, narrow trench, almost shoulder to shoulder. I was next to an officer who had to get something out of his own haversack because he couldn't turn round. Shortly after, he told us we had only 5 minutes to go. When the whistles went, everyone climbed up the scaling ladders and through the holes in the front of the trench. Once outside, we formed up in a line with our rifles in front of us and started to move forwards. It was 200 or 300 yards to the enemy line. We moved slowly forward. We didn't run. And for the first short distance, there seemed to be no casualties. But it soon became apparent men were going down rather quicker than one realized. Then we came to a sunken road that had to be crossed at an angle. It was, unfortunately, a spot marked by German artillery and machine gunners, so we very soon afterwards found that only a few of us were still going forward. My officer called me and said, "You stick to me and I'll stick to you." I said, "Right," but immediately lost sight of him. I don't know what happened to him. At that point, to my great surprise, a hare ran along in front of me, its eyes bulging with fear. But I don't think it was half as frightened as I was. I was hoping that reinforcements would soon be coming along so that we could attempt to go forward again. But no one came. No one could get through that barrier.
Epping Road. And when we were sailing along, all of a sudden we were hit. A shell had struck the track and broken it, so we were finished. We were under terrible gunfire. You wouldn't believe the shells going over the top of the tank, whiz bangs and big ones. The state of the ground was terrible. There were great pits full of water, full of dead mules, and the stench was indescribable. The tank commander got out and tried another tank. We stayed where we were, because we should only have been killed if we'd gone outside. As it got towards dawn, the officer, Lieutenant Thompson, said, "Well, chaps, we shall have to make a run for it. If they catch us when it's light, we're done." He explained where we were going to be safe. We ran two at a time, while the German planes came swooping round and firing at us. We were very, very lucky not to be hit. You could see the bullets going round Thompson and his shell. Now we move on to the Second World War. Never, never, never believe any war will be smooth and easy, or that anyone who embarks on the strange voyage can measure the tides and hurricanes he will encounter. The state who yields to war fever must realize that once the signal is given, he is no longer master of policy, but the slave of unforeseeable and uncontrollable events. On the 18th of August, they sent a very formidable force over Southampton area. We had 3 sorties that day. I got one on the 1st, one on the 2nd, and damaged one on the 3rd. We were so confident at that time, there was no doubt in our minds. We knew we weren't going to lose. I suppose, in retrospect, we were bloody stupid, but it never entered our minds that we could possibly lose the war. Then we had a new CO posted in, and he decided to come as my number 2 on a scramble. We found a lone Junkers 88 over Winchester. Well, I had a go at it, he had a go at it, no effect. So I got behind it, got as close as I could and filled it with bullets. He hit me through the main spar, then stopped firing, and went into the ground. When we landed back at base, the new CO, very keen, wanted to go and have a look for the Junkers 88. It had crashed into a field, very close to Middle Volley. I'm now very sorry I went to see it, because someone informed me that every aircrew helmet had bullet holes in it. And that brought everything home to me.
From the little rooms, the little wireless and radio rooms behind the controller, we could hear the crackling noises of the pilots coming back. And although we had headsets on, and the work was quite intensive and required a lot of concentration, we used to manage to ease one earphone off so we could hear what was going on. And then we would listen out for tally-ho, which meant they'd sighted the enemy. And then you could hear them talking to each other like, "Look out, Blue 2, bandits to your right," and things like that, which seemed to bring it into the room. There was an indescribable tension about the whole thing. When there was something going on, the atmosphere was electric. We were all rooting for our boys to come back.
Rommel attacked and pushed us back through to Brook. He pushed us right the way back into the Alamein position, which had been prepared for months. They'd prepared properly constituted minefields and defences in some depth. We were the last British units over the Egyptian border, which was called the Wire because the Italians had laid a huge border of barbed wire in peacetime. I was bringing a truck back which was in a pretty bad state and being towed. We got to a place called Fuka, where there was a huge naffy which had been abandoned that morning. Such was the rapid advance of German forces that they just had to down tools and to take off. But there was a terrific cauldron of hard-boiled eggs still bubbling merrily on the fire. There were cases and cases of stuff all over the place. We got into the naffy, picked up 1 or 2 nice bottles of drink and a few of these boiled eggs, and took off down the road.
I give you a toast, ladies and gentlemen. I give you a toast, ladies and gentlemen. May this man be loved so well, in dignity and freedom. No words may change and go awry, while there is still one voice to cry.
One mass of craft, landing craft of all kinds, shapes and sizes. There was a good feeling as we went forward, except that most of the army was seasick. I wasn't very happy myself. However, when we got in sight of the shore, we were being spattered with light gunfire. Nothing very heavy at this moment. Finally, we got within sight of the stakes, the dreaded stakes, with shells and mines on, which protected the beaches. Our coxswain did a marvellous job. We were headed straight for this stake, and I could see the 50-pound shell lashed to it. In just the last second, he missed it. He got it just right. He steered us in, between the stakes, got us ashore without touching one of those shells. At the order down ramp, we were all surging ashore. We were in a few inches of water. All around were craft beaching into chaos, and more gunfire was pouring down on us. We ran under fire to the top of the beach where we went to ground, about 100 yards from high water. People were screaming and crying all around us. We watched them going ashore. From the bridge of my ship, they looked like little models, moving forward, stopping, firing, and moving forward again. Coming in from the big ships were the flotillas of the landing craft. And as we watched, the guns still blazing away, they formed in line abreast and were rushing for the surf line of the beach. I found myself banging the bridge with my clenched fist. By God, we're ashore in France. We've done it. We're back in France again. The attention of the world was on the preparations for the Second Front in northern France, and on D-Day, the invasion in Normandy. Far off, in the Burma jungle, in another major struggle, the Japanese attempted to invade India, but were beaten back in the battles around the besieged small border towns of Imphal and Kohima. I was at Kohima. There are few men alive today who can make that claim. But whoever they are, they should be accorded respect. For they fought through an ordeal comparable only to Stalingrad in the Second World War, or Passchendaele in the First. In early 1944, Burma was a forgotten battleground. But though the war in the jungle went largely unnoticed, in many ways it was the hardest war of all. The Japanese battle plan was audacious, far-reaching, and simple. A wholesale advance into India. 100,000 troops were to assault first the British bastions Imphal and Kohima. Then, 30 miles further north, cut the Bengal-Assam Railway, the main supply route to General Stilwell and the Chinese. If successful, they would bypass the 14th Army, leave Stilwell out on the limb, and have India stretching before them. In the third week of March, the Japanese committed 8 divisions, surging over the Kohima Ridge, cutting the roads linking Imphal and Kohima with the outside world, and isolating Kohima itself. A Japanese force of 12,000 lay siege to the Kohima garrison. Battalions of the Royal West Kent and Assam regiments, mustering just over 1,500 men. For 14 days and nights, the defenders of Kohima held on. The battle was bloody, with the Allies supplying Kohima by parachute, while the relief force battled to reach Kohima from Dimapur. The garrison disputed every inch of ground against overwhelming odds. Slowly, the perimeter contracted until, after 2 weeks, the defenders were confined to a single hilltop, completely surrounded, and raked day and night by artillery, mortar and machine gun fire. But the relief force got through. The Battle of Kohima was far from over. The Japanese launched an all-out effort to capture the town, crucial to their battle plan. On the night of April the 22nd, the 1st Royal Berkshires and the 2nd Durham Light Infantry, holding Garrison Hill, were attacked with a rain of shells and water bombs, followed by the fanatical Japanese infantry. Fortunately, flames from a burning ammunition dump silhouetted the attacking Japanese, and a murderous curtain of small arms fire swept through them. The Durhams suffered heavily, but held their positions, losing 15 officers and over 100 men in this struggle. The damage they inflicted on the enemy was greater. The equivalent of 4 Japanese companies had been killed or wounded. One critical location in the Kohima battle was the tennis court of the District Commissioner's bungalow. For a time, all that separated the Japanese and British lines. After much slaughter, the British winched a lead tank up a 1 in 3 gradient to fire over open sights into the enemy bunkers. That tank did its job, but its burnt-out shell left in Kohima was a sign of the price that its crew paid for victory. Tom Hope remembered, a lot of good lads got killed. It was a horrific battle. We went in and got them out and opened the road, but then we were stuck on the hill. If we'd lost it, the Japanese would have been down into India. It was the turning point of the war. It was the first time they'd actually moved back. They'd lost so many men, and their lines of communication were overstretched. We couldn't get tanks up there, so it was hand-to-hand and face-to-face. They would come charging up the hill, and of course it was a great honour for the Japanese to die. That's why our lads got treated rotten. On the DLI, he said, I think the British chose a good troop there. They fought, and they fought, and they fought. They were all Northern lads. They were a very good regiment to be in, believe me. But there were a lot of casualties. Around 130 members of the DLI died. Towards the end, we had a padre as our senior officer, because we'd lost so many others. We had 4 sets of brothers in the DLI and lost 1 of each. The battle raged for weeks until the Japanese withdrew on the night of June 6th, and the Battle of Kohima was over. It had lasted 64 days, and had seen some of the most stubborn and bloody fighting of the Second World War. Of 100,000 Japanese in the initial attacking force, 50,000 were dead. Tom from Roker was proud of the way his battalion changed the face of the war in Asia, but disappointed that this chapter of history is lost to many people's minds. We were the forgotten army, definitely forgotten. When you see the armistice parade, you never hear anyone mention Kohima. I'm not allowed to say how many planes joined the raid, but I counted them all out. I counted them all back.
I could see the shoreline and was convinced my idea deserved some exploration. I got on the radio to H and said, From where I am now, I believe there's the possibility to infiltrate along the shoreline and possibly turn this. H was clearly having a frantic time with A Company on Darwin Hill, and bit my head off along the lines of, "Don't tell me how to fight my battles, can't you see we're busy up here?" So there we were. It was his battle. So what could I do that was useful? I told the men to make a brew, which I think they found rather strange, but there was nothing else rational we could do, and they needed the energy to fight until the evening. I'd literally just got my porridge on the boil when we received the news that H had been shot.
We had now hit the main Argentine positions surrounding the settlements and the airfield, so needed to devise some method of getting through the crust of this defence, having lost our momentum. H was agitated at the loss of momentum and the speed of the attack. I asked him to give me an hour to turn the area of Boca House. Then I could assault the enemy facing A Company, rolling them up from above. But about 10 minutes later, H decided to carry out a personal attack, which led to his gallant but very sad death.
Back at the office on the Saturday in the UK, it was absolute chaos. The Argentines were trying to negotiate a particular arms deal in a European country, and the secure telephone on the other side of the room was answered by one of the civil servants, who shouted that the embassy involved was on the line for me. At the same time, my phone rang with Colonel Peter Morton, who said, "It's you." At which point I lost all interest in the arms deal, picked up my briefcase and went home. My wife and I were having H. Jones's wife Sarah and our 2 boys round for supper that evening. It became very apparent that the next of kin had not been informed of the deaths in 2 Para, which had not been done until all the 2 Para casualties were known. Sarah Jones would be having supper with us without knowing both that her husband had been killed and that I was to take over from him.
We attended the burial of 15 Paras, including Colonel H. Jones. It was a drizzly, dirty, cold morning, perfect for funerals, and they dug a long pit. The Paras stood around it, which was already filling with water, and they laid out the black body bags. The Royal Marine Bomb Disposal expert who wrote poems stood on the hill just behind the funeral, playing a dirge on his fiddle with the soft murmuring of prayer, and the body bags being slowly covered by the waters. They allowed us to film it.
Afghanistan, today. My vehicle shook violently as the first volley of bullets struck the near side wing. One by one, the Taliban fighters revealed themselves and started to advance on us. We had to get out of the killing area. I felt the shockwaves as it washed over us. Debris started to rain down. Human remains almost certainly among it. The firing had stopped the moment the bomb impacted. I sometimes wonder, when people see me standing somewhere like this, what they actually see. When they look through the medals and the ribbons, when they look through the uniform, they look through the weapons, what is actually standing just in front of them? Is it just a soldier who is willing to die for his job? Is it a soldier who's willing to kill for his country? Or is it just another person, exactly the same as you, who is doing the job he's been asked to do? Is It's interesting, and soldiers are asking themselves this question all of the time. I listened, and I did some absolutely fantastic recollections of conflicts gone past, which was nearly like poetry when you read it. We listened to it, and we're in awe of these people because what they were doing was just cause. And it's like a poetry to us all. And we listen to this wonderful, wonderful singing, which invokes these wonderful songs of conflicts gone past. But what about modern conflict? What about today? What is our poetry? Is our poetry destined to only be the sound of the bullet and the bomb and the explosions and the screams and the cries of the young men dying in the Afghan deserts and fields? Is our music the music of children as they cry as one culture clashes with another culture, vying for a piece of land? I hope in years to come that our poetry will be written in a slightly different way, and there will be poetry will invoke the sacrifice that we have suffered today in Afghanistan, and there will be songs to invoke the bravery of those young men who go to that country, and no matter what you believe, they go to do what they think is good. I joined the army 27 years ago, and although it says in the front of this I'm retired, unfortunately for me, I re-enlisted a month ago. I'm now in the Territorial Army, so my career continues again. Aren't I lucky? So 27 years I have spent in the military, and I've had a truly fantastic life from quite humble beginnings. I joined when I was 16. I didn't want to be a soldier. I think I wanted to be an architect or something sort of exciting like that, but I didn't. I joined the army. Why? Because through quirk of fate, in a troubled Northern Ireland, I accidentally shot my best friend in the face. And in an attempt to win favour and make my father proud, I did the only thing that I could do, and I enlisted in the army in the same regiment as he joined, and I continued on the family tradition in the military. So that's what put me into the army. And then I had a most wonderful time. Some of it you'll know straight away. I guarded Rudolf Hess. Many people don't know. I remember taking this same sort of lecture and saying to a group of kids at about 18, 19, saying, I guarded Rudolf Hess, thinking I was a great boy, and they hadn't a clue who he was. But I guarded Rudolf Hess in a divided Berlin back in 1983. It was amazing. I also guarded the missiles at Greenham Common, and the only threat we had against us were these wonderful women on the other side of the fence who used to sing through the fence at us. Some of them could grow a better beard than I could. They were wonderful. And they were wonderful years. And I traipsed through a military career, stopping at various theatres of operation, including Bosnia, including Kosovo, various tours in Northern Ireland, a little stint in Africa, and a few places you probably wouldn't have heard of, and the government wouldn't want to admit that they put British soldiers in. But I had a wonderful time in the military. I became a regimental sergeant major. To many is a scary old person to be standing in front. And I was very proud in 2003 to stand beside Colonel Tim Collins when he did his famous Eve of Battle speech. And I was very, very proud to take our soldiers into Iraq to fight a battle which we thought was just and good. Again, does it matter to the soldier that it turned out to be wrong? To us, what we believed we were doing was right and good. And there's a lot said about how we behaved once we're in Iraq. So I'll put my point of view across. And I try to do this to some people. Some people don't want to listen because people are inherently want to hear the bad about people. So I will tell you what I saw. I saw my soldiers as the most incredible, compassionate men that I had ever seen in my military career. I watched them give away their food to Iraqi soldiers who we had captured. Used to give it away. I watched them carry them physically in their outstretched arms when they were wounded. I saw them give water when they had none. It's truly amazing the compassion showed. When we had to bury their dead, it was done with a degree of gentleness that you would not imagine. They took the dead body of the Iraqi soldier, they took it to an area of burial, they took a burying towards Mecca, they then buried him, they marked his grave, they registered his grave, they got one of his comrades to come along and say a prayer over his grave. Incredible gentleness. But we don't get to hear too much about that sort of thing in the media. But that's what the soldiers were like when I fought in 2003. But it's interesting when I think back on my army career, and I think that 27 years, and counting, that actually the first 22, 23 years were spent peacekeeping, doing good for people. Even when I went to Iraq in 2003 and I got into a little scuffle, that scuffle was about saving lives. And I was awarded the Queen's Commendation for bravery for saving lives. It's amazing. It's a very small oak leaf, very small, but it's the proudest thing that I wear on my chest. Small oak leaf, because it was for saving lives. It was for saving the lives of 2 Baptists in Iraq, and I was awarded the Queen's Commendation for bravery. And I am as proud of that as I am of anything that I have done in my life. But my naivety of the military disappeared pretty much in 2006, and let me try and explain this in a little story. I was going to leave the military, having been commissioned to be a captain, and I told the wife, wonderful wife who stayed with me for 22 years, that I was leaving the army, and she said, "Well done." And then 2 days later, my commanding officer came in and said to me, "BT, you're going to Afghanistan." I said, "Well, I'm leaving the army." He says, "I know, but you're going to Afghanistan first." So in July 2006, I was sent to Afghanistan. What was I going to do? I was going to be an intelligence liaison officer for a Canadian battle group called Task Force Bayonet. And I remember arriving in Kabul, then being flown to Kandahar, and then going to meet the people who I was supposed to be working with, and standing up very cocky and saying, "Hi, I'm Doug Beattie. I'm here to work as an intelligence officer with Task Force Bayonet." And they all started laughing. And I couldn't quite figure it out. I thought they were laughing at me. You know, what's wrong? And one of them took me to one side and says, "Well, Task Force Bayonet left Afghanistan 2 years ago." So I was stuck there with no job to do. So one of them came to me and said, "Well, listen, would you be interested in going to Helmand to do a job in Helmand working with the Afghans? Set up a new desk working with the Afghans in Helmand. A desk job. Sit behind a desk and then work with them. Get to know them, point them in the right direction, an easy job." And I set off to Helmand. I set up this new coordination centre, and I started working with the Afghans, the Afghan police, the Afghan army, and the National Directorate of Security. It was like a special branch. And I worked with them on a day-to-day basis. And I lived with them on a day-to-day basis. I grew a beard, I ate their food, and I got to know their culture, and a warm culture it is. And maybe I'll talk a bit about Afghan culture later on, because it's a real light and dark with Afghan culture. But I certainly remember arriving and working with these Afghans, eating with them, sitting cross-legged on the ground, eating goat on top of a mountain of rice with some flat bread, eating with your right hand only, scooping it up. But it was always goat. It's always, no, it's always goat. Go with it. There's nothing else, just goat. Every day, chunks of big red, grey goat was sat in front of me. And then one day I went out on patrol, and I was out in the desert, massive big desert, there was no water anywhere near me, and the police major came to me and said, "BT, today you will eat with us." And I said, "Okay, there's nothing new there. What are we eating?" And he says, "We are having fish." And I looked around, and there was no water for miles and miles. And I said, "What sort of fish?" And he says, No, just fish, just fish." So I turned up that night and sat down cross-legged, and now it was placed in front of me the mound of rice, and sitting on top was this huge chunk of goat. And I looked at him and I says, "It's goat." He says, No, it's fish. Tomorrow it will be chicken." And it's the nature, they have a sense of humour that doesn't necessarily come across to everybody else when they watch the news reports. But there is a real humour within them, and a real honour within them as well. I mean, there was another occasion, and talking about food is always very good. I know a lot of you look at me and I'm slightly overweight. I need to lose a cup size or two, and you might have thought you had an Andy McNabb standing in front of you instead of what you've got. But I was eating with them on a second occasion, and they set in front of me this pile of rice, and sitting on top of this rich gravy with this stuff in this rich gravy, and I didn't know what it was, and I said to my interpreter, who was aptly named Bollywood, true, and I said to Bollywood, what is this? He said, it's goat. He says, it doesn't look like goat to me. I've eaten all sorts of goat. This does not look like goat. He says, it's goat, it's goat. So I tasted it, and it was absolutely vile. It was vile. I couldn't eat it. And I looked at him and I says, this isn't goat. He says, it is. It's the inside of a goat. It's the heart, it's the lungs, it's the intestine, it's all the offal. And it was pretty awful. So I had to lie. I'm sorry, but I had to lie. And I said to this, please tell the Afghan army commander, it is against my religion to eat the inside of an animal. And he told him, and he jumped up and said, I'm sorry, prostrated himself, I really apologize, and then grabbed my dish and ran outside. And within 10 seconds, come running back in again with a dish which had a mountain of rice and a chunk of goat sitting on top, and set it in front of me. And I looked down, and it was absolutely clear somebody else had been eating this. What he had done was run outside to the nearest soldier, thrust my food in front of him, grabbed his food and dashed in and set it in front of me. So I then had to sit there and eat this half-eaten goat. But you know, working with the Afghans was truly an incredible experience. But there is a light and a dark about working with the Afghans. The light is that they're incredibly gracious people. They will give you the last morsel that they have in their home, and they have nothing. They love their children. They love their family. Their sense of community within the family, the village, the tribe would put us to shame. Honestly, it would put us to shame, their sense of community. When somebody's harvesting, the village harvests. When somebody's roof is leaking, the village fixes it. When somebody's got no food, the village gives them it. The community is amazing, and their hospitality is first class for people who have nothing. And the dark side is that culturally, and it's only culturally, I cannot understand some of the things they do. The fact that they marry their daughters off as young as 13 to men 60 and 70 years of age. Not on the odd occasion, it's what they do. It's the norm. And I find that hard. The way they abuse young boys, I find difficult to understand and difficult to stomach. Their absolute disregard for life. They would kill and would not think twice about it. And things like that I find difficult. And they're all things that as a soldier, and things that you probably don't realise that a soldier has to deal with when he goes to Afghanistan. Because not only is he scared of somebody shooting at him, or somebody detonating and blowing himself up, or standing on something, you have to understand the political situation of Afghanistan and the cultural situation of Afghanistan. And I spent the first number of months in Afghanistan in 2006, in Helmand, learning all of this. And it was a fascinating time. But I was behind my desk, in the most part. And my wife was happy that I was behind my desk, in the most part. And then, things changed. In the south of Helmand, there was a town called Grimethorpe. And Grimethorpe fell to the Taliban, I think it was about the 8th or 9th of September 2006. And there was no forces to go and recapture it back. The governor of Helmand was going to resign because we couldn't take it back, and he had lost face with the tribal council. 3 para, who were the only battle group there, couldn't go down because they didn't have the manpower. So a force was cobbled together of 17 British soldiers and 150 untrained Afghans, and we were sent down to retake the town of Grimethorpe, which was held by reportedly 1,000 Taliban. Our battle would last 2 days, and after 2 days, a relief force would come down, take over from us, and we would leave. But the reality was no relief force came. So the battle lasted for 14 days. And it was a battle which changed my life for the good and changed my life for the bad. It started on the 11th of September 2006, exactly 5 years after the Twin Towers atrocity, with an initial assault on the town of Grimethorpe. Initially we started at the back, pushing forward the Afghans, and then we had to go to the front and lead them into battle. And it was a vicious battle. It is as vicious a battle as you would have seen in the First or the Second World War. Believe me. The 11th of September also sticks in my mind for another reason. At the age of 40, a lifetime in the military, I took my first life. I killed somebody. I don't say it because I'm proud. I don't say it because I want you to think, well, here's a brave man. I say it because it's a fact. It's a physical fact. There's now somebody on that day who is dead, and he is dead because of me. I wrote a book, and in that book I tried to be honest. I tried to write what it was like to take a life and the thoughts that went through my mind on doing that. And I think it's just nice to read to you, and I'm not a good reader, as you probably already found out. But this is an honest opinion of what it's like to do that. And I wrote this book very shortly after coming back from Afghanistan. The man stared back at me with intense brown eyes. There was no fear. This time I didn't hesitate, didn't analyse. His sharp outline became blurred as I refocused on the small foresight at the end of my weapon and squeezed the trigger. It was also almost an innocent act, a drill, a bit like being on the firing range shooting at a target made of metal. The weapon bucked into life as I released a 5-round burst, the link and empty cases spewing out of the gun to my right, landing on the floor of the vehicle, joining a growing pile of spent cases. The bullet exited the barrel at a phenomenal speed, travelling towards the Talon at more than 800 metres per second. That didn't give him much time to get out of the way. If that first volley had been wide or high, then perhaps maybe he would have had a chance to escape before I fired again. But it wasn't. It was spot on. I lifted my eyes up and away from the sight and gazed down the road. As he came back into focus, I saw the result of him being hit by at least 3 rounds. 2 had caught him square in the upper body, the impact causing dust to fly up from his cloak as if someone was beating a rug. The 3rd round hit him in the head. I couldn't quite tell where, it didn't really matter. His skull shattered, parts of bone, blood, brain, hair, flesh, spinning out in all directions. The force of the impact threw him back into the cornfield and out of view. For the first time in all my years of soldiering, I had killed someone. There was no doubt about it, I had taken a life. Perhaps during what had gone before that day, I'd already taken others. Maybe the fighter at the window who fell from view was a victim of mine, but this was a definite, no questions. And personal. I was face to face with the enemy, close enough to identify features, distinguish some blemishes, certainly recognise bravery and determination. It set off a whole train of thoughts. Was he married, like me? Did he have children, like me? Were members of his family counting down the days till he came home, like mine were? Perhaps he had an absolute belief that everything he was doing was just and right, and that God was on his side as he defended his homeland against an evil aggressor. What was waiting around the next corner for me? Another enemy, who this time would be quicker than me, luckier than me. If any scrap of romanticism of Lawrence or Maine had been left inside me, it instantly evaporated. The tearing apart of another man's body banished it completely. War is about dirty, disgusting realities that are rightly an affront to most people. It's about blood and guts and pain and distress. Nothing more. The truth is, having taken that life, I then went on that day to take many, many more in the line of my duty. I then went on to take many, many more over the next 14 days. Some I had to take, and I took to save my life and complete the job that I've been asked to do. Some, even today, even as I speak to you, I cannot reconcile my actions on that day. That maybe I didn't have to take that action. That maybe if I hadn't, somebody would have lived and went back to their families. But as soldiers died around me on my side, and the enemy died in front of me, I fell into that spiral of living war 24 hours a day for that 14 days. And let me tell you, it is hard to sleep at night time when you have thrust your bayonet through the neck of another person. But in the midst of that horror, wonderful things happen. The camaraderie between soldiers thrown together is something truly amazing. It is amazing. I tell you now, I have got friends for life. Friends for life, who I haven't seen in the last 2 years and have only ever met for 14 days. One of the bravest, noblest men who I ever fought beside, who I got to know, was an Afghan. His name was Major Shawali. He was in the Afghan National Police. He originally started off in the Taliban, and the government said, we can give you a better life. And he changed to the government side, and he fought with the government side. And I had many a conversation, and he used to say to me, I want a better country for my family, and I am willing to pay the price to get that. This is not your fight, BT, this is my fight. You just help me fight that fight. And he fought beside me for 14 days. He saved my life on a number of occasions. But when I say he saved my life, I'm talking about a man who would dive on top of me to stop bullets coming my direction. A man who would cover me with rocket-propelled grenades exploding above my head. A brave man who on the very last day killed as he fought beside him. I feel his loss. A Muslim soldier fighting with me in Afghanistan as much as I feel the loss of any British soldier who fought with me. An incredibly brave man, an incredibly brave people. And that was Grimethorpe, my 14-day battle. I then went on to fight a number of other battles throughout the rest of my tour of duty. I was hit with a suicide bomber while I was in the governor's compound, which was truly awful, but I wouldn't dwell on at this moment in time. And in December 2007, I left Afghanistan. I left Afghanistan to join my wife, my children, to have a better life, leave the army, and never have to face war again. Initially, I had problems dealing with what I had done, what I had seen. People call it combat stress. People call it post-traumatic stress disorder. I don't know what you call it. All I know is I lived Afghanistan for many months after I left it. I could smell it, I could taste it, I could see it. It invaded my mind all of the time. At night times I dreamt about Afghanistan. I was running along them drainage ditches in Grimethorpe, passing dead bodies as I went. But when I looked down at those dead bodies, I didn't see an Afghan. I seen an Afghan body with my wife's face, or my children's face, or my friends' faces. Something that will affect you for the rest of your life. And then a friend of mine said, write it down, Doug. Just write down what you did. Let somebody read it, communicate. And so I did. I wrote down what I had done. And I let my wife read it. And my wife has been incredibly supportive. And the result of those writings is now an ordinary soldier. For those who read it, and I say to you, be careful, because it is an honest account of what was happening back then. For those who read it, they will see an honest account of a soldier, an ordinary soldier, who does the fighting in Afghanistan. Not the general, not the politician, the man who's actually doing the fighting. And that's an honest portrayal of what that fighting in Afghanistan is like. But I was out. I was awarded the Military Cross. Queen pinned it on my chest with the words, what did the wife say when she realised you weren't doing a desk job? Of which I couldn't quite answer. And to be honest, all I could think about was the Rowan Atkinson skit where he spends all his time getting ready to meet the Queen, and when she arrives he bends and headbutts her. And I just didn't want to do that. So I was trying to bend like this. But I was out, I was decorated, I was safe, and I was with my family in 2007. You rarely see it coming, the moment when calm is destroyed and lives are ruined. In the blink of an eye, mayhem comes to reign. I had experienced such pivotal events time and time again, yet almost without exception they had caught me by surprise, sucked my breath away. In 2008, I returned to Afghanistan. I went back, having vowed never to go back near the country again, to never take a life, to never be in that dangerous position ever again, to give my wife the love and respect that she deserved. I turned my back and I went back to Afghanistan. Why did I go back? For those who have been in the military, you may have an inkling of this. For those who haven't, you may think I'm just a fool. But there was 3 reasons. I had been to Afghanistan, I had left, I had been awarded a medal, and I had survived when so many other people had not. There was a degree of worthlessness within me that I felt deep down. A shame that I had not done my part in Afghanistan, that I had to do it again. Secondly, the people of Afghanistan. I went to Afghanistan to help, and I brought destruction. And I still remember the faces of the Afghans when we all left and left them to their own devices as they looked at us pleading to stay and help. So I thought I would go back. Thirdly is, well, I'm an Irishman, for those who couldn't tell. I come from an Irish regiment. We're the last one. I grew up with these people in that regiment. Some of them I trained, some of them positions that I put them into, and they were going back to Afghanistan. There was absolutely no way I could watch this on television like some voyeur watching them fight the war, with me knowing what they were going through and possibly in the position to help. So I went back in 2008, hoping that things had improved. But unfortunately, things had got worse in Afghanistan. The people were the same, the policemen were the same, the fun and the laughter and the games were all the same, the camaraderie with the soldiers was all exactly the same, the funny little quirks that you see that people won't believe you but are absolutely true were exactly the same. I was up at a place called Kijaki. Kijaki Dam is in the north of Helmand. It's a huge reservoir and dam which feeds electricity to Kandahar and to the rest of Helmand. And I was up there mentoring the Afghan army. And we're back to fish story again. And they came to me and says, Beattie, we shall go fishing today. And we had time off, and we tried to get to know these people and live with these people and do what they do. So I said, okay, let's go fishing. So I made myself a rod. Funny. A little bit of string, a little bit of bait on the end. A couple of the other guys came with me. And off we went up to this dam where there was an abundance of fish, because there's a small sluice going off it where the fish used to swim. And we sat on the rocks with our bottle of water, with our fishing rod in, and again the Afghans were laughing at us. What are you doing, you fools? I think they were trying to say in the best Dari. And I said, well, we're fishing. He said, it's not how you fish. Watch. So he stepped back, and he grabbed a couple of his men and he sent them downstream with big nets. He then stood at the side of the river and threw in hand grenades. And the hand grenades would go in, bang! The fish would be stunned, they'd all float to the top, and the water would flush them down. And the guys at the nets would then pick up these fish and bring them out. It's a huge catch, but that's how they used to fish. And we used to look and think, these people are mad, absolutely mad. And then 2 months later, we were doing exactly the same thing. You know, it's these small quirks, these funny things that happen, which you don't realise. But in 2008, I travelled throughout the whole of Helmand, and I've got to say, and people have told me this afterwards, that in 2008 things were so much worse. I had 50 major engagements with the enemy. 50. That's not counting the engagements with the enemy where I was too tired to react and my men were too tired to react, and we had the Taliban shooting at us, and we just said, I'm too tired, mate, and we all went back to our base. That happened on many occasions. But 50 major contacts with the enemy. It was happening every single day, and we were losing men at a terrible, terrible rate, even in 2008. And I know this year has been even worse. And next year, I've got to tell you, it's going to be exactly the same as this year. But it was difficult. And to try and give you an idea of how difficult it was, one checkpoint I was in was at a place called Marja. I was sitting there, we'd just come off a patrol. It was the 12th of July 2008, it was 12 o'clock, midday. It was absolutely roasting, I was sweating. I'd just come off patrol, I took my body armour off, and then there was a huge explosion just outside our camp. And a 15-year-old boy with a bomb strapped to his body walked up to the checkpoint, held his arms to the side, and detonated himself. In doing so, he killed 2 Afghan soldiers immediately and wounded 5 others, including another 15-year-old boy and a 9-year-old boy with an injury to his leg. And over the next 2 hours, my small team, and there was only 5 of us, fought to save the lives of these seriously wounded Afghans. And it's difficult to save the life of a man who's unconscious and involuntarily trying to push his own brain back into his head. And yet the men were trying to do this. I watched as one of my soldiers, and I looked at him, and I remember him today, and he's a friend of mine. His name is Shirley Stewart. He's a Lance Corporal who carried a wounded Afghan over his shoulder into the base, and I looked at him and he was covered from head to toe in blood. Then I watched him trying to give resuscitation to this wounded man who had lost most of his jaw and his mouth. And as he breathed in to give air to his lungs, he turned and vomited on the ground, wiped his mouth and did it again, but couldn't keep him alive. And I remember when this man died, this Afghan, who was only 15, it's not the suicide bomber, it's a different one. I remember when he died, and the doctor said to me, he's dead. And I said, well, get his father in here, get rid of this body. And this man turned around. And this old man turned in and said to the interpreter, does he know he's dead? No. Well, tell him he's dead and get the body out. And he told him he was dead, and the old man showed no grief. He took his son away, put him in a hand cart, and wheeled him out. And it struck me just how cold I had become. To be able to even think like that, never mind talk like that. I think it was truly awful. What transpired for that whole incident is this 15-year-old suicide bomber didn't actually detonate himself. He was detonated by the 9-year-old boy standing behind him. He actually detonated him, the one that was wounded. Truly awful. And after we'd got rid of the bodies and we were cleaning up, I witnessed a truly horrific scene, and that was the Afghan army soldiers who were terribly angry, grief-stricken at the loss of their men, had gone outside to where this suicide bomber had detonated, picked up what was left of the body parts, had made a washing line, and had hung these body parts on this washing line. Small feet, small hands, little bits of head, ear, hanging on this washing line. Truly medieval. And it took everything I could then to take it down and burn the remains of this young man. That was one of the incidents. Another one of the incidents was that I was in the Upper Gresh Valley. I was fighting a battle deep of the Green Zone, which I call Oz, by the way. If anybody reads the book, they will hear me referring to the Green Zone in Afghanistan as Oz. Because when you're in the desert, it's grey and it's bland. But the moment you go into the Green Zone, it's like going from Kansas into Oz, like the film. You know, all technicolor all of a sudden. It's amazing. We fought this incredible battle one day, side by side with the Afghan soldiers. We killed 6 of the enemy. We captured 1. And it was a good day. The Afghans had done well. It was a good day. And we took this prisoner back, and as we left the Green Zone to head to our base, the Afghan turned their weapons on us, held us at weapon point before they murdered the prisoner in front of us. And it's things like this which affect young men when they feel responsible, as I do, for the death of a Taliban fighter who was taken prisoner and should expect leniency. But death is a part of being a soldier. What is sometimes terrible in this great culture of ours is that now we talk about the dead coming back from Afghanistan, we're not talking about people anymore. How many times do we see in the news, Soldier 200 has now been killed, Soldier 101 has now been killed, Soldier 135 has now been killed? Whatever happened to the individual? What happened to the personality? What happened to his aspirations for the future? He died in a worthy cause. He didn't march to his death unknowing. He died in a worthy cause. Remember them in a worthy way, not as a number. I lost two of my very good friends last year. One unfortunately stepped on an improvised explosive device, which I've got to say, you hear in the news, is two-dimensional. Somebody steps on a device, he's been killed by a roadside bomb, caught in an explosion. But I tell you, when you're there, it's far more than two-dimensional when you see this man who lives for 20 minutes screaming in agony before he finally succumbs to his injuries. But at the end of July, a good friend of mine, Jonathan Matthews, was shot and killed. Jonathan Matthews was beside me when the suicide bomber struck. And I went home in R&R for my daughter's wedding, which was an incredibly difficult time for me. And when I come back, John had been killed. Single shot. He was dead. He had served with me on many occasions. I had known him very well. I'd known his wife. I knew his family. I knew his aspirations for the future, his fears for the future, his fears for the children. And yet, in the blink of an eye, I had lost this young man. And we all grieve back in the UK, and they arrive, and Wooden Bassett pays an incredible tribute as these coffins go through to their final resting places throughout the country, and some politician will make political gain out of the whole issue. But before they even get back here, they are said farewell to by the soldiers in Afghanistan. And we said farewell to John as we say farewell to every soldier who's killed in Helmand. And again, I will read to you the passage that I wrote about the death of John and our sending him home, which is very personal to me. In, out. John was going home. In, out. Leaving Afghanistan for the final time. In, out. The words whispered by the NCO marching behind the coffin. In, out. His orders slowly, respectfully propelling forward the 6 men bearing John, their arms linked at the shoulders to take the weight of the vessel and the body it contained. Heads not bowed, but raised high. Proud they had the honour of carrying a brave soldier on the first leg of his final journey. In, out. The only other sound, the occasional crunch of boots on the sand and grit as the party crossed the apron towards the rear of the C-130 and the low melodic notes of the piper leading the way. The tune, Flowers of the Forest, a lament to the Scottish defeat at the Battle of Flodden in 1513, rolling out through the darkness of a Helmand night. Otherwise there was nothing, just 150 men standing in silence, some illuminated by the clusters of arc lights thrown out thousands of watts of light, others hidden in the shadows, surrounded by colleagues, but alone in their thoughts. In the splashes of brightness I could see a variety of headdresses, the green corbine of the Royal Irish, the maroon beret of the Paras, the tam o' shanter of the Royal Regiment of Scotland. The men wearing them formed into 2 lines, between which John passed, and not just John. For as if to emphasise the perils the British troops faced, there was a second bearer party, this one for a soldier of 2 para killed in Sangin, led by the battalion's colours. I followed my friend's coffin with my eyes as it slipped by. Just as those carrying him were honoured to do so, so too was I to say I had known him. And John was a wonderful man, who is with us no more, and gone is his good grace and his humour, and his lust for life, and a family is broken. And I've done that many, many times. I have known many soldiers who have perished in Helmand. I have known of many soldiers who have perished in Helmand. And I have stood and watched people who I didn't know as they were sent home from Helmand. Because that's the price of what we're trying to achieve in that country. And I wouldn't dream of trying to get political on anybody here. But there's 2 sides to every coin. And when people talk about the fighting, let me tell you there's another side to the fighting in Helmand. And you will only know there's another side to the fighting in Helmand if you have had your boots there, if you have worn a uniform, if you have picked up a rifle, if you have fought the battle. You will realise what it's like to watch children go to school for the very first time because you built them a school and you're standing guard over that school. To To watch young girls draw water from a well which you helped sink, which you gave them a pump for. To watch young babies being born in the hospitals of Lashkar and Goresh using oxygen that you put in that has kept them alive. That is the other side of what we're doing in Helmand. And I challenge our media to stand up and tell that other side. And don't just use it as a way to bash a government whether you support it or not. But for those who think that you can support the troops and have a go at the tactics in the government, I tell you now, the troops' morale is eroded by this. They are trying to achieve something. If you ask the soldier, he will tell you that he agrees with the tactics. He will tell you that he agrees with what they're trying to achieve. Many people will never agree with what I say, but I've been in Afghanistan, I have been in Helmand, I have lived with the people of Afghanistan, I have seen their aspirations for the future. They have bled and some have died beside me, and I've watched British soldiers die beside them. It is not for nothing. Just because they're a third world nation doesn't mean they should be treated like a third world nation. They should be treated as we treat our own children. And if we can bring peace and prosperity to that country, then we should. My final act as a soldier finished in October 2008 when I left Afghanistan, when I left Helmand. I've got to say, I left having had the diarrhea for 21 days in a row. I lost 3 stone in 6 months. You've been thinking now, haven't you? I lost 3 stone in 6 months, and I came back a leaner, fitter man to my wife, who I now promised that I will never, ever, ever rejoin the army and go away again. And then the next month I joined the TA. What's it like? What am I like? Life as a soldier is rich. There's many things that you do that are unpleasant, but I wouldn't have changed it for the world. And I would go back and do it all over again. People say when they read my second book, they see a colder side of me, and maybe that's true. But being able to reflect on that colder side, and being able to identify that colder side, I think helps me an awful lot and makes me a slightly better person. Thank you very much. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deed could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes up short again and again. Because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But it is he who actually strives to do the deed, who knows the great enthusiasm, the great devotion, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who, at worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly. So that this place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. As I look across the vibrant fields of purple and lilac poppies in bloom, I see the grey soldier silhouetted against the colour on another endless patrol. To him they are no throwback to Flanders Field or the nation's symbol of grace after the Great War. To the soldier it means only one thing. Winter is over, the poppy harvest is complete, the fighting season is about to begin.
Please stand. So, hold our troops in your loving hands. Protect them as they protect us. Bless them and their families for the selfless acts they perform for us in our time of need. Amen. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. We will remember them. In Flanders fields, the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep. Though poppies grow in Flanders fields. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad you're standing, because I think you should stand to salute Captain Doug Beattie and for all he's given to us tonight. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a fantastic evening, very moving and also very funny in parts. I thank again our singers, our companies, our readers, and we thank Captain Doug Beattie for being with us. And we're all proud of people for having him with us. Thank you.